Hi there, and welcome to the discussion table with Rose. We have 30 minutes to discuss the most historical and controversial election of our generation. Sit back, relax, and get ready to learn all about the 2020 presidential election. There's no doubt about it. No matter what side of the political spectrum you fell on, this election was controversial, historic, and overall chaotic. I sat down with the former mayor of Springfield, Mike Albano, to discuss the hecticness behind this election, even just one day after the election. And it was interesting to see the mayor's point of view and how he agreed with me on the fact that this was definitely one of the most chaotic elections that the American people have and probably will ever see. I'd like to thank you again very much for meeting with me. Obviously, it's been a crazy election, and I'm sure you're very busy, with all of this interesting stuff that's going on that I haven't seen. I mean, compared to 2016, this is a little bit more hectic than I thought it was going to be. I just would like to get your views on if you agree with whether it's hectic or if you think there's going to be a different outcome than 2016.
Well, first, Rose, it's great to be with you, and I'm delighted to be here. But to say it's hectic is really an understatement. This is historic for you and your viewers. I don't think, at least in my lifetime, that we've seen anything like this. We can go back to the year 2000 with Al Gore and George Bush in Florida, but that was really only one state. And it was challenged. And of course, the case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. And by a 5-4 vote, George Bush was declared victor because they stopped the recount in certain counties of Florida. I can go back to 1960 when I was a little boy and Richard Nixon and John Kennedy, and there was some questionable counting in Illinois, and eventually Kennedy was declared the victor. But we had to wait a day. But then again, we didn't have early voting and mail-in voting. Here we have both early voting, mail-in voting. Votes haven't been counted yet. It looks like Pennsylvania won't count votes until Friday at the earliest, and maybe even into next week. And it could come down to Pennsylvania, depending on what goes on in these other states. So this is really historic, and I don't think your viewers are going to see anything like this again in their lifetime. I've been about as glued to the TV as you can get. I've been sitting in front of it. But I find it very interesting, too, that President Trump has already claimed that he's victorious, when clearly you need 270 electoral votes to get there, and he's over 100 off. Well, I saw that speech last night. I saw former Vice President Biden deliver his speech at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and then I saw the president give his speech at 2:15 or so. And I didn't understand either one of them, quite frankly, having been in this business for a while. Biden came out and gave some type of delivery that every vote should count, which of course it should, and that he thought the campaign was in pretty good shape. And then Trump came out and said that we were ready for a victory party, and then everything stopped. Of course, that didn't make a whole lot of sense either. And then he confirmed basically that the election had been stolen and this is a fraud. It wasn't going to be a certification last night for sure. I mean, elections go on and certification doesn't happen sometimes for weeks at a time. And then, of course, you have the Electoral College and you have the meeting in January and you have the final vote taken then. So this is a long process that takes place in American politics. So for the president to come out and make that declaration, it didn't make any practical sense to me. But he had 300 people at the White House and they were all clapping for him. And both of those messages by the former vice president and president were designed to send a message to the American public. In Biden's case, they took a cue from Al Gore, who many believed had been a little too passive in 2000 by not getting out front. And they thought he wasn't aggressive enough in stating that he had a claim to victory in 2000. When Biden got out there, he was making a claim that he had to get out there and make a statement. Trump then took advantage of the situation and basically got out there and said, I won the election. I won it fair and square, and this thing is over. And that was a message to his supporters that now the race is over and that they are taking the election away from me. So now they both go back to their to their battleground campaigns, and the war is on. And I guess what we're going to see here is challenges in multiple states, recount petitions in multiple states, and most likely this is probably going to make it to the United States Supreme Court at some point.
And that leads up perfect to my follow-up question to that is, obviously Trump in that speech did talk about how he's going to bring this to the Supreme Court. However, I found that I don't think that he has enough basis to do that right now, like obviously because there's no clear victor and there's still a lot of a lot of votes that haven't been counted. So I find that a little bit premature. I'm not sure if you find that the same way.
No, you make an excellent point, Rose, that you have to exhaust all your administrative remedies first before you can tackle it in the courts. By administrative remedies, I mean you've got to go through the recount process, you've got to tackle it in the state court system, because after all, this is all of these elections, even though they're federal elections, are governed by state law. So you've got to exhaust all your administrative remedies first by the local election process, the recount, and then you can challenge that in a superior court and then a state Supreme Court, and then you can file writs in federal court. So he's way premature. And I don't believe that the Supreme Court of the United States would take the issue at this time, because there's nothing before them in which to get their arms around, so to speak, and to have a real case before them.
Right. I definitely agree with that because, like I said, there's so much still up in the air. I mean, we still are waiting on a whole 9 states to really submit the rest of their votes, even though we know that for the most part, we know Arizona's definitely going to be Biden territory. I mean, he's up, I believe, the last time I looked, he was up like 5 points, which in Arizona, which was Trump's territory last election, I think that's a lot. And I think that shows that like a lot of people are ready for change in the country. But I think it's going to be interesting, especially the northern middle of the country. So Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I think those are going to definitely be, if Biden does pull out a win, I think it is going to be within those 3 states.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things we're going to realize from this election in this campaign for president was, I think pollsters are now going to be out of business. If you look back at 2016 and then again this campaign, these pollsters are way, way off. You take Michigan, for example. The last polls that came out said that Biden was going to win by 17. The last that I looked, they were within a handful of votes. I mean, it's 1% either way. It may differ when the write-ins are finally, or when the mail-ins are finally counted. But be that as it may, it certainly wasn't a 17-point differential. They had Trump losing Wisconsin. They had Trump way behind in Pennsylvania up until the last week. Florida, they had Biden winning. I mean, these pollsters are way, way, way off. I mean, I read some reports where they had Biden getting 374 electoral votes. That's not going to come close to that. If he gets 270, he's going to be fortunate. So I think polling is, there's going to have to be a new system, a new research analysis on how to go about conducting these national polls and these state-by-state polls. So if they can't do it on the presidential, on the federal campaigns, how are they going to do it on the local elections? I just think the polling business is in for a major surprise here. And I don't know why anybody would pay anybody to get a poll result that is so far off. But having said that, the Midwest, I mean, it looks like it's changing. For Trump to come that close in those states is a real surprise to me. So I think there's something that's going on out there that Democrats should be cognizant of. The other thing is that if Trump loses, I don't think he's going away. I mean, Biden's going to turn 78. Trump is 74. He's certainly got a base of support. He's going to get 65 million votes. And I don't think that he's the kind of guy that's going to go away. And he's going to be awfully difficult to beat in Republican primaries 4 years from now.
So I think that America is in for a roller coaster the next few years. But
no question about that. And I've been around a little bit longer than you have, but I've never seen America this divided before in its politics. It's just they can't seem to agree on anything on the federal level. And the amount of animosity between the parties. I mean, even that little gesture that Dianne Feinstein made to Lindsey Graham after that judiciary hearing on the Supreme Court justice nomination, just a little hug after the nomination. The Democrats wanted to remove Feinstein from her position on the Judiciary Committee. I mean, it was a hug after the contentious hearing over a nomination. I mean, my God, if you can't even have some type of decorum with your colleagues that you sit next to, just because he's a Republican and she's a Democrat, I mean, what is this country coming to in terms of our political leadership? I mean, that was a pretty sad moment. I don't know if you picked up on that. You probably did. But to remove her from a leadership position because she didn't fight hard enough to block somebody from the Supreme Court. I mean, I just find that kind of repulsive in terms of political sportsmanship. We're supposed to at least get along in this. Elections have consequences. The Democrats didn't win. And when there's a Republican in the White House and you have a Republican Senate, the Republican has a right to nominate somebody. Now, you can disagree all you want on the timing of this, but elections in terms of office don't cease. It's 4-year term for president. It's a 6-year term for members of the Senate. And just because there's an election coming up, you can make the argument that my term expires at the end of 4 years, at the end of 6 years, and I have a right under the Constitution to fulfill that term of office. So that's what they did. So you know what? Go out and win the election, Democrats. Go out and win the election, Republicans. And then, it's fair game after that.
America is definitely divided, and I can see that in the numbers that we're getting right now, especially in like I said, the northern middle of the country. It's very, very tight, which was something I wasn't expecting. And I think that just goes to show with the large amount of voter turnout that there was, because I mean, I was 15 when we were voting in 2016. I don't really remember all of the details as well, but I don't remember voter turnout being as high as it was. Especially, I was looking in Florida, in Miami-Dade County, I believe. The fact that they were having more people turn out, but Biden was losing support. I think he had 7 points on Trump in that county versus Clinton, who had 30, which is obviously concerning. And it just kind of shows like where our country is, where it's like how it's so divided.
Well, sure. And a couple points on that. And one is that in 2016, no one gave Trump a chance. And again, I get back to the polling that was done. He was supposed to get slaughtered electorally, and he had no chance of winning. So a lot of people just stayed home. And the Trump team, to their credit, got their base out, and they won in those key battleground states. But the other part of this whole thing is that this media, I don't have as much faith in the media anymore. Years ago they had 3 stations: CBS, ABC, NBC, and you got all your information from those 3 news sources, and they were pretty good. They were at least they were honest, and they had a presentation that was pretty fair and not biased. Now, you pick your media source depending on your political persuasion. So, I mean, you get your news now, and you base your opinion based on these news sources, but they're really not news; they're political commentary. So, we've got to realize that. And as students of government, I think you have to realize that the media is such a powerful force in the development of political thought. And look what Twitter's doing. Look what Facebook is doing. I mean, censoring the post over what? What right do they have to censor political views and commentary of anybody?
Based off of the lack of trust that people have on the media, it allows their opinions to be shaped differently. The older I've gotten, now I study communications and political science, and I realize how important it is. Even if you don't like the news source, you need to at least watch a little bit of it so you can understand where the other side is coming from, or versus where I'm coming from. I mean, most of the time I lean towards ABC, MSNBC, but I will watch Fox News occasionally to make sure that I'm getting both sides of the argument.
Well, I teach a course in government at as Nantucket Community College, and I ask my students, where do you get your news, and which news source do you trust? And we run the gamut, and some people watch Fox, and some people watch CNN and MSNBC. And I said, but if you really had to get a true story, and you could rely on it for honesty and fairness and not being biased, what station would you really go to? And they really don't have an answer. And so we did kind of a survey in that section of class where we talk about the media. And the best answer that we came up with, that the class came up with, was PBS, that they thought that was the straightest down the middle news version of events that you could get that was pretty fair and balanced.
But also too, I find it interesting to look at like foreign countries' views on like the American election and like how those are completely unbiased.
And I haven't really followed what they think about Trump in general and some of his tweets and some of his antics and what his position is in the world these days. You know, I mean, he talks a good game here at home and how he gets along with all these foreign leaders, but it'd be interesting to see how the foreign media treats the president of the United States.
We have a long time to go before we even are going to have an answer to who becomes the 46th or stays the 45th president of the United States. Do you think you have an estimated timeline of when we're going to know?
I don't, and I followed this as closely, I think, as anyone. But you know, until they count all these ballots, and depending on how these states go, you're not going to know. For example, Nevada is 6 electoral votes, but it's going to be consequential. They're not going to have an announcement, I guess, until tomorrow. Wisconsin's going back and forth. Michigan is going back and forth. It's possible, from what I understand now, that Pennsylvania may not be the key state. If Biden can carry Nevada, Michigan, and Wisconsin, my understanding, if I'm doing my math right, is he's the next president of the United States. If Trump can take Wisconsin or Michigan, then maybe we do have to go to Pennsylvania. And therefore, we're talking into next week. But this is one election that is historic for you, your classmates, your viewers. I mean, this is something that I don't think you'll ever see again in your life.
Well, I just want to say thank you again for coming and talking to me about this historic day. Well, it's going to be a few historic weeks, I think, and from the sounds of it, I think you agree with me as well.
I do.
So thank you very much.
It's great to be with you, Rose. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks.
And today with me, I have my former classmate and teammate, Kennedy Winslow. Kennedy is a freshman student at Columbia. We went to high school together. We debated together. So I'm very excited to have her on my show and to talk about the chaoticness of the election. We now know that Joe Biden won. Were you expecting that to happen, or were you expecting a Trump victory in the last minute?
You know, I was waffling back and forth. Like, I really wasn't sure, and I really didn't want to, say anything. If you look at the electoral system, it wasn't too far from a possibility on election night of Trump winning. So
it was like when Trump was winning, a lot of states. And then I'm like, okay, Rose, reminder, Democrats are more likely to vote by mail. You're okay.
Yeah, that was me on election night. I was like, you know what? I know my grandmother and half my family mailed their things in. Not that anyone was worried about the, balloonist, the sanctity of Massachusetts.
Right. Were you surprised that Biden won any states? I know I was surprised he ended up winning Georgia.
I mean, even though it's currently under contention, I was very surprised that Georgia pulled through. Because, my opinion of the southern states, I mean, when you look at states like Mississippi, it's a red state. It's not a red state. That's the blackest state in the nation. Not saying that black people are a monolith who vote exclusively one direction, but that's a big determiner of what direction a state's gonna go. Just this is sort of jumping around, but if you look at Fulton County, Georgia, the county that contains Atlanta, that county is shaped like there's a little bulb on the top, I don't know.
It's gerrymandering.
Yeah, gerrymandering. Looking at the South is we just drew some lines to make sure that this stays red for the next 300 years.
And I also, too, was kind of, interested in the fact that Biden and Trump were as close as they were in North Carolina. I don't know if you thought the same thing.
Yeah, North Carolina was probably the most interesting race, even though it was, really low-key for the entire thing. I never expected it to get called for Biden from the first night on, but the fact that they took that long was really, interesting. I have family down there, so I know, what the sort of landscape is like.
So the northern Midwest, so we're talking the blue wall, so Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I was holding on. Once I realized that Biden was taking Wisconsin and Michigan,
I had a pretty solid feeling that he was going to take Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that was crazy. I think the blue wall up upper Midwest, I was a little confused by that, honestly. I mean, you don't attribute that to Biden or blue, like,
No.
especially with the rally.
Okay, so one more state we're going to quickly talk about, and then I also want to bring up to the fact that the transition of power isn't as peaceful as it should be. What were your thoughts about Miami-Dade County in Florida? So that's like obviously where Miami is, and I believe Clinton had won it in 2016 by like 30 some odd votes, or 30 some odd percentages, and Biden only won it by like 10%, which I think plays into the fact that the Trump campaign, and I will give them this, were very targeted when it came to who they wanted to get their vote for, and obviously Miami is extremely has an extreme amount of Latino culture, and obviously they were playing on the whole you vote for Biden, he's a socialist. Well, he's not. And I think that in that respect, the Trump campaign, like, did their job.
Yeah. I gotta say, like, more so, like, America in general, their perception of the, like, political spectrum. But, yeah, I did notice that in, Florida. I was actually discussing this in my race and ethnicity class. But the Democrats are so split. Anyways, like, the Democrats are in constant disagreement. There's, like, the old establishment, and then there's sort of the new freshman class of Democratic Socialists coming in, like actual Democratic Socialists. I guess the right, essentially, has managed to sort of cordon them all off together, despite the fact that there's not really any agreement in the Democratic Party right now. And even despite that, the right has managed to capitalize on, like, whatever aspects of it that they need to. And I think that's interesting as a strategy.
But, like, looking at it as, like, through, like, the political science sphere, like, he actually, like, his campaign actually did a good job. If, like, obviously they were targeting that group of people, and their campaign did a good job in doing that and making sure that they are associating all Democrats with socialism. And because, you know, a lot of, especially in Miami, a lot of these people are ancestors of immigrants who came from Castro's Cuba. So obviously they did his campaign did a good job in trying to compare Biden and Castro.
I mean, they definitely did a good job there, and I think that can be pretty much solely attributed to the fact that Trump is such a unifying figure, like, in the right. Like, I mean, because when you hear about disagreements with Republicans, I mean, you think Mitt Romney, who's, I'm pretty sure, still in office, will probably remain in office, and you hear about, like, Susan Collins, who barely, like, stuck by it, like,
yeah.
So I think, like, they just have the advantage of that unity, whereas the Democrats are sort of eking through, like, what's right for their ideologies.
I don't know if you saw Vice President-elect Harris was on the floor of the Senate the other day, and Lindsey Graham went up to her and gave...
Yes. I saw that, and I was seeing people like, this is a real politician, and that was sort of one side of the aisle, and the other side of the aisle is Democrats and Republicans want the same exact things for you. Like, it's hard not to see that when you see that, but I think that's just, you either want to just, like, embrace any sign of unity you see, or you want to, like, criticize any sign of, like, just joining together.
But I thought, personally, I thought that was a beautiful moment. Like,
yeah, I thought that was, I mean, beautiful. I don't know if I would say beautiful, but relieving.
All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about pre-election. So I'm talking all the way back from March. We're going to start on March 13th, the day that all of our lives changed forever. The coronavirus.
Yeah, that was the lockdown in Massachusetts. Okay.
So, obviously, there's so many other options. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to compare countries.
Trump supporters were definitely unified around him. I mean, I think it's been said a million times before, he could walk out into Fifth Avenue and kill someone, and they would still vote for him. But like you said before, there were still those true Republicans, the people who are like, oh, I'm financially conservative, socially liberal, and people like that who sort of, like, I guess, centrists, really. Mm-hmm. Who voted for Trump in the first prior in the first term, who, like, once you see sort of the actual, like, chaos of the coronavirus response, which had its phases somehow. It was like just a multi-headed monster. Every time, like, you cut a head off, something got worse.
The next part I'm going to talk about is basically what transpired over the summer. I mean, obviously, it's been transpiring for the past decades, specifically this summer, because I personally believe it really ramped up and became more of a political issue, is the Black Lives Matter movement, and how it definitely, I mean, I don't remember Ferguson as much. I mean, I was 15. Like, we were young.
Yeah.
I remember Charlottesville. I remember the white supremacists coming out with torches and then running over that innocent woman. For me, a marking moment in this movement will be everything that transpired over the summer. I think our country is more divided over a subject that shouldn't be as divisive. I'm talking about the popular vote. I'm still shocked that Biden only won by, last time I looked, 5 million votes. Like, that's not a large margin.
No, for context, but I'm a Black student, and I distinctly remember, maybe not Ferguson. I don't distinctly remember Ferguson. I do remember a few of the pictures.
Yeah.
Because, of course, that's, like, all you see of it. I remember the George Zimmerman decision, which happened when I was in, like, 6th, 7th grade. I don't know. But that was crazy to me. For the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, it was an intersection of things. Like, people are out of work, and on top of that, the people who are being affected by coronavirus the most are, like, Black and brown individuals in, like, underfunded communities. So we've got, like, a war on all fronts. Like, economically, everything's crap. Socially, everything's crap. And now we got time, I guess. Like, the fact that it didn't affect the election results, not surprised, disappointed, always, yes, but definitely not surprised at that.
All right, well, on that note, I am now done with questions. Again, I would like to thank you very, very much for joining me.
100 years ago, women were given the right to vote. It is so beyond important you exercise that right, no matter who you are. Your voice needs to be heard in our government. If you are wondering if you are registered to vote or where your polling location is, please visit vote.org and they will give you all of that information. Welcome to the local editorial, where I share my opinions on something that is going on in the city of Springfield. Who is Preacher? Preacher was a Springfield resident whose name is Randolph Lester, a man who gave out Bible verses, lottery numbers, and who became an icon within the city of Springfield. He was often seen panhandling within the city. Preacher had a rap sheet, plain and simple. He also had 25 other charges before his death. Preacher was simply an example of the mental health crisis and stigma within this country. Many people would have looked at Preacher and think that he was crazy, instead of looking at him and the fact that he was probably suffering from some form of mental illness. Instead of helping him, they fed into it. By all means, AIC should have done more research before deciding to facilitate such a powerful piece of art. But this mural represents the city of Springfield and how hope and love can come from something as negative as mental illness. Thank you for listening to the local editorial and my opinions on this powerful piece of artwork on our campus. And there you have it, 30-minute rundown of the 2020 presidential election. I would like to say a special thank you to my interviewees, former Mayor of Springfield, Mike Albano, and a former classmate of mine, Kennedy Winslow, for sharing their thoughts and opinions on my show. If you ever are looking to figure out where you can vote, please check out vote.org and they will give you all of those details. Again, that's vote.org. Thank you very much for tuning in to my show, The Discussion Table with Rose, and I look forward to continuing on with this podcast.